I don't know if it records both of us or just you. So when it's just two of us, it may just do both. So I'm here with Conte Seely, and we're doing a little bit of history of TPR, total physical response, and how things came about, with an interview with Dr. Asher and Bertie Siegel-Cook, and now Conte Seely, who is the C in the ABCs.
Right.
So
right.
can you tell us about how you got started with TPR?
In what year? Long ago. Must have been in the 60s. Can't remember exactly what year, but anyway, I heard something about it, and so I got in touch with Dr. Asher, and he sent me some things to look at. I looked at them, and then I started trying it and using it in teaching ESL and Spanish to adults.
Where were you teaching them?
I was teaching, well, let's see, I think I was teaching in Oakland, ESL, in Oakland's Chinatown, and I was teaching Spanish in San Francisco. And in both places, I was teaching adults. And when I started the class in San Francisco, as a beginning class, the class grew quite quickly. People were excited about it, and the word spread. So at one point I had maybe 50 or 60 students in that class. Wow. And then we moved my class from a regular classroom in what was a middle school to a sort of stage with it was like an auditorium sort of, but not immense, but much bigger than the classroom. And so anyway, we were all having a lot of fun, much more fun than any of us ever had before in a language classroom.
And there weren't any materials at that time, right?
Well, Asher's the first edition of his book, Learning Another Language Through Actions, was out, I think, and there was, in that book, there were lessons that had been developed by an ESL teacher that she had used with adult students. So there was that. That was just a sort of a sample.
Yeah, I think that's the last part of the book is all just lesson plans.
Yeah. That's
the first thing I used.
It's still in the current edition too.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So when did you start writing about TPR?
Oh, well, let's see. You want to know more about the history of TPR?
I want to know why you think it works, and and I know that you wrote TPR.
I'm not interested in where it came from and who started it.
Definitely. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the first, as far as I know, the first thing that was in print about it was published by Harold Palmer and his daughter Dorothée. He had worked in Japan. He was British, and he had worked in Japan before the Second World War, and published this book in 1925, I think it was. Yeah, and the book was called Learning Another Language Through Actions. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was called English Through Actions. And it really really was TPR before TPR, the name TPR was given to it by Asher.
Wow.
Way before that, and Asher was the one that told me about it, and I haven't found anything else that preceded that. However, let's see, you asked about our publishing. We published this book for the first time in 1979. Elizabeth Kaisinger, Romain, and I. And then we published subsequently 5 other, same thing in 5 other languages, in French and German, Japanese. Oh, this is German. Sorry, I showed you Italian before. German and Spanish. And here comes Elizabeth's daughter and granddaughter. They're coming in the door right now.
You also wrote TPR is more than commands at all levels. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Right. TPR is more than commands at all levels. I love that book. It really does take it beyond the basics of TPR. And then what about Bertie Siegel Cook said that you also sell her books?
Yeah. Yeah, this is, we have this, Teaching English Through Action. That was her first book.
Uh-huh.
And it was also translated into several other languages. And then we now have this book, which is Spanish version of that for teachers and students.
Great. All right. So what? A lot of times in
I want to go back a little bit because these books are based on their series of commands. That was what was different about them from what Bertie was doing and what
Right.
Ed had shown in his films and in his book. So and that goes back to Francois Gouin, who in 1880 published a book about a series of actions. He didn't say that people should do them, but he said that this was useful. He developed.
Resume. Go ahead.
Starting where?
I didn't lose anything. I stopped after you stopped talking.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So in the 1980s. That was in the 1980s.
1880. In 1880.
Oh my gosh.
Gouin published this book that had a series of actions, and his method was called the series method. And he came up with it because he saw his nephew playing in a creek. His nephew had gone to a mill and the day before, and then that day he was Francois Gouin's book. And
With 1880. Uh-huh.
And he developed a series method, which involved a series of actions, but he didn't say that people actually did them. They just talked about them. They may have done them, but he didn't say so. So we don't know exactly.
So do you think
our book was based on series of actions, just as the series method in 1880 was.
so I think that's what are you referring to we call chain commands, where you do several in a row?
No.
Okay. What's the series method?
Well, it's like what's in our book. There's a series of commands that all have to do with a particular situation. If this is in English, the very first one is about washing your hands. And
Oh,
you're going
okay.
to wash your hands, turn on the water, pick up the soap, wash your hands, put the soap down, rinse your hands, turn off the water, pick up the towel, dry your hands, put the towel on the towel rack. And that's one whole series of commands that people actually do. And the teacher demonstrates them with actions, and the students do them to simplify it very, very quickly.
Right. I've seen those with cooking, having kids make sandwiches and the directions to make a sandwich, that whole series, like that. So I may have even seen that in yours, but I've seen it as an example of how to do TPR. So
Okay.
they do the actions when you
Oh, yeah.
make instructions?
Oh, absolutely. That's what TPR is.
Mhm.
Actions and commands. But actually, and what Elizabeth and I were doing was series of commands that all had to do with, a particular scenario. So it was like a lot like a little story, but we didn't think of it that way at the time.
Right. Directions for like a task.
Yeah,
You
or
want,
all sorts of things. Anything that involves various actions in a row. So, this one's getting home. That's not a task exactly. This is a candle, what you do to light a candle.
okay.
Uh, this is giving directions to go somewhere. And subsequently, this shows a map. We developed software based on several of the lessons in this. This was the first software program, and then there was a second one based on more series in the same book. And we had a Spanish version of the first one. We still do. This is from the Spanish book.
I think I saw this you were showing a video as an exhibitor. It had to do with getting out of bed in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
That one's one of the first ones. Let's see it here. Good morning.
Right.
Yes.
So there are a lot of people who are starting with TPR storytelling, which I love and I do, but I always started and still do start with TPR. Do you feel like there's still a place for TPR and TPR storytelling?
Well, sure. It's good comprehensible input. It's usually comprehensible without translation, but in some cases you want to make sure the difference between go and walk, for example, you might want to translate to make sure that everybody understands which word you're talking about.
It seems like it works even particularly well with ESL or ELA, where you might have students in a class that speak several different languages and you may not speak all of those languages.
Well, yeah, but it works in any language.
I just mean like in a Spanish-English class, we can translate if we need to. And in ELA class, they're working a lot harder because they may not know Vietnamese or Mandarin or whoever is in front of them.
Yeah, right. An ESL class, or what did you call it?
ELA, English Language Acquisition. It's called that in several places.
Oh, okay. Or anything language acquisition. German, Dutch, Spanish, and where there's a mix of people. It's just that it'll work. If you can translate it, it'll also work. You don't have to translate it necessarily, but yeah. anyway, it's useful. I don't think, obviously you don't have to start with it, but it's useful at different times. And it's uh, one thing about it is that it is all about commands, and in TPRS we don't use commands very much. The are commands are useful as well as everything else, and of course with TPR you can actually use them and actually do things, and you can do all sorts of things.
Certainly, and I don't see that I don't feel like there's any difference in the method with TPR, where when you change things to the narrative form, the third person singular form, and then still do everything the same way, but you transition into storytelling more quickly that way. So sometimes commands, sometimes third person singular, but I found that if I basically was thinking to myself, the class walks, the class goes, the class runs, the class jumps, that then when I went to say the boy walks to, that I was able to immediately transition into storytelling, which is functional for what I wanted storytelling to do.
Oh, so yeah, that's an excellent idea. And I did the same thing when I was teaching. Yeah.
Joe Nelson is the one who taught me that he just did TPR, but with third person singular set of commands, and he's did everything the same way. But I find that you can still do TPR even up through upper levels. And so you wrote the book, TPR is more than commands at all levels. Is that what you were thinking?
Is that what I was thinking?
That you could continue to use TPR up through the upper levels of classes? It wasn't just a beginning strategy or method?
No, I don't think that was what we were thinking. That was what we were thinking, that there are things you could do based on the commands. But I agree with that. That I think the commands are important at all levels. There's somebody read us a testimony back here that says this book is useful. He finds it useful. It fills gaps in upper level students' English wherever he is in the world. And so I think that's true. One thing about doing the series is that you can use a lot more language than you can if you're just doing things in a classroom and with what you have available there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we use props with these books, with these commands, with these series of commands, and they help a lot, but they're not absolutely essential, but they help a lot. And I mean, especially because we're getting into a number, using it, doing a lot of different kinds of things that are not just stand up and look at the window and point to me and point to your friend. It's more than that, all sorts of stuff. And we do imaginary things like being a bird or being a dog. Things that you are a dog, you are a bird, and we give commands to you as a bird or as a dog.
Nice.
And you do them. And you so okay, wow. So the using series of commands takes you a long way. Can take you a long way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You can even have stories.
Yes. Definitely. And that's what I like to do, is start with TPR and introduce the vocabulary, and then go into just a short story. We used to do these like mini situations where there were just 3 lines. It wasn't long, complicated stories. And those worked really well with TPR, these mini cuentos, before we got into like longer stories and more reading, just as an intro. And we could recycle a lot of the vocabulary that way.
Great. Yeah. That's all. it's all good.
All right, so your website to find your books and Birdie's books is cpli.net, correct?
Correct. cpli.net.
Command Performance Language Institute. All right, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.